Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Kenny McBride and joining me tonight once again is SNP socialist and trade union activist Chris McCusker. How are you tonight, Chris?
A wee bit under the weather, Kenny, but yeah, I'm still alive.
Well, we will get through it, I'm sure. So our first story tonight, thankfully, is not Brexit for once, just for a wee change. This is some unfortunate news from another part of the world. Turkish warplanes have struck the Kurdish-led SDF in northeastern Syria, sparking what was described as huge panic among people. According to SDF spokesman Mustafa Bali on Twitter today, Turkish warplanes have started to carry out airstrikes on civilian areas. Syrian state media and a Kurdish official separately said the bombing hit the town of Ras Al Ain in the northeast along the Turkish border. This is a long-planned military operation, according to the Turkish President Erdogan, with Kurdish forces currently in control of the area reporting these airstrikes and huge panic. This move was triggered by Donald Trump's announcement at the weekend that US troops would be withdrawing from the area where thousands of captured ISIS fighters and their families are held by Kurdish forces, and which threatens to open a new front in the long and bloody Syrian war. According to Erdogan from a tweet today, the Turkish armed forces, together with the Syrian National Army, just launched Operation Peace Spring against the PKK, YPJ and Daesh terrorists in northern Syria. Our mission is to prevent the creation of a terror corridor across our southern border and to bring peace to the area. Of course, this comes, this is the Kurdish SDF in the area have been allies of the US until this point, and it does seem that for whatever reason, Trump has decided to abandon them to their fate with Turkey, who have had a long-standing campaign against the Kurds, or at least Erdogan's government have had a long-standing campaign against the Kurds, as of course have the Syrian government, and previous to that, the Iraqi government under Saddam Hussein. They are a persistently persecuted people. And in this case, it seems that the American administration is now happy for that area to fall under the Russian sphere of influence. That seems to be what's assumed will happen now. So what do we make of this? I mean, it does seem like a fairly unexpected move from Donald Trump. It's drawn criticism from some NATO allies, but it's still happening, and Turkey is now acting against the most friendly, the most progressive, the most secular force in the entire region.
Well, Trump is. It's not unexpected of Trump. However, it's basically he is living up to one of his aims when he was running for office, was that he would take the military back out and bring all the troops home, which was, it might not have been a vote winner, but it definitely possibly figured on the swing meter. Mm-hmm. But you are right. Is basically abandon them to their fate, and it could be seen that it would create a resurgence of more involvement, a bigger involvement from Daesh as what we've had in recent years, and it just adds to the instability of the whole Syrian region, and it is just so unnecessary at this moment in time. And you can only hope that with Trump, he changes his mind as much as he changes his attitude to several things. He's a bit of a weather vane when it comes to decisive decision making. You can only hope that he might roll back on this But honestly, I really fear for the whole region. As you say, the Kurdish people have been more than cooperative, and it really is a sad state of affairs. It's indicative of the times that we live in, where one superpower exercises its will against other states that are struggling.
Yeah. And just for a bit of background, the Turkey, as I said, has been having issues with the Kurds for a long time. The significant numbers of Kurds in the SDF were also a member of the People's Protection Units, which are an offshoot of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK, which has been fighting an insurgency against the Turkish state for more than 35 years. They initially called for independence. They now are fighting just for more autonomy for the Kurds in Turkey. But Turkey claims that they're a terrorist group and they have to be shut down. It is, strictly speaking, it is listed as a terrorist group by Turkey, the US, the UK and NATO, which is an awkward situation because, as I said, the SDF has been the one really reliable partner that the US has been able to find in this battle with ISIS. Nearly 11,000 ISIS fighters, including almost 2,000 foreigners and tens of thousands of their wives and children, are being held in detention camps and prisons across the northeast of Syria. This is SDF-controlled territory. The SDF has been pleading for several years now for international assistance in dealing with those prisoners, but the US, the UK, Australia and others have all been quite reluctant. As we've seen in our own country, there has been calls to cancel the citizenship of some of these prisoners, meaning that it would be almost impossible for the SDF to send them back anywhere. So this is, just an ongoing mess. Some people are saying that a Turkish invasion could open the door for Russian and Syrian forces to invade this SDF territory from the west, or else force the SDF into an alliance with Assad, which is not what they want, in order to protect the Kurdish area from Turkey. However, that would be very likely, and I don't think this will surprise many people, that would increase the influence of Assad's Russian and Iranian partners in the region and grant them access to the northeast's lucrative oil fields. Syria, like some of us, has oil fields in the northeast that are obviously of great strategic importance. And having the Kurds control them doesn't really suit any of the other powers in the region.
No, it doesn't. We have to be clear here that, since Trump has decided to pull his troops out, it then gives over for Turkey to be the main aggressors in this. With regards to the oil fields and stuff like that, that's the biggest asset that any country can have, and Scotland knows that more than anyone. However, our assets have been pillaged and plundered nicely, shall we say?
Not at the point of a gun, as
over the years, not over the point of a gun, as you say. But again, this would see Trump ramping up his rhetoric for a global trade war, and basically he wants to involve as many countries as possible, whilst holding them at arm's length for a certain time, befriending them and, lauding platitudes and stuff like that, and then the last minute just dropping them like a hot potato when things don't go his way. The involvement of Russia could really, set the whole cat amongst the pigeons, and it's certainly something that I don't want to see escalate. Nobody wants to see region or city, at this moment in time. However, the situation that we're in just now is one of as far-reaching consequences for throughout the rest of the world, because the Kurds they're a nomadic people. They will settle anywhere that offers them respite from what they're used to on a day-to-day basis. And you should have actually have got Rosala Salih in tonight. She is an absolute mastermind of being Kurdish herself. She has got a plethora of information on this, and she does fantastic work in highlighting the oppression that the Kurdish people have to go through, within the SNP. But it's not going to be one of these sort of like 3-day events.
No.
If I could trivialise it in something like that, and I don't mean to trivialise it, it is going to take arms and legs, and it's going to rage on and on and on, unfortunately. And as I said, it's Trump is pulling the strings on this, and I can only see it from my point of view as that he doesn't care about the humanitarian implications that come out of this. Again, the businessman that he is, he just sees this as a precursor to a global trade war.
Yeah, it's a tragic situation by any standards. We will obviously just keep an eye on that story. As you say, this war in Syria has been ongoing now for almost 7 years, and it, as you say as well, it shows no immediate signs of coming to any sort of peaceful conclusion. So we will just keep an eye on that. Meanwhile, more really sad news in the German city of Halle, in the east of Germany. Police said they were dealing with a rampage situation after a gunman reportedly targeted a synagogue and a kebab shop in the city, killing 2 people. Shots were fired in the Paulus Quarter north of the city centre around midday. The head of the Jewish community in Halle, Max Privorotsky, told Spiegel magazine that gunmen in military gear had tried to force their way into a synagogue but were repelled by security personnel. The community, of course, had been celebrating Yom Kippur. There were said to be 70 to 80 people in the synagogue at the time of the incident. Privorotsky said that we barricaded the doors from the inside and waited for the police, and worship actually continued after the attack. Witnesses also said that attackers fired at a nearby kebab shop, reportedly killing a male customer inside. 2 people were taken to hospital with bullet wounds. Germany's public prosecutor has taken charge of the investigation. Would not comment on a possible background, but said that we are investigating into all possible directions, including anti-Semitic and right-wing extremist motives. Police later said that 1 suspect had been arrested, but urged people to remain vigilant, saying, "Our forces have detained 1 person. Please remain alert, however. We have deployed forces in and around Halle and are stabilising the situation until we have all the relevant information." So we've seen shootings like this in the US a number of times recently. This is the first one we've seen in Europe for a wee while. An apparently right-wing lone wolf type attack on, in this case, a synagogue and a kebab shop. In the US, we've seen it on the Hispanic community. We've seen attacks on black churches. What do we make of this? Is this just a one-off, a lone wolf, or is this part of something bigger, do you think?
We would like to hope that it's just a one-off lone wolf scenario. However, we have to be mindful that the rise of right-wing populism is not we aren't just witnessing it in Britain at this moment in time. It is on the resurgence, unfortunately, throughout Europe, and it's not just down to one country. I mean, France has had its fair share of right-wing neo-Nazis. There was, I think there was an attack in Belgium a couple of years ago as well. So we have to be mindful that, these people are, they're within our society, and there has to be warning signs. Somebody must have heard something as a precursor to this heinous crime. It's an absolutely heinous crime. In a smaller scale, Kenny, I have to tell you, a couple of weeks ago, there was a young lad from a school in East Renfrewshire that actually, in his school uniform, stood outside a synagogue in Giffnock, and he was given Nazi salutes. He, obviously, thankfully, he wasn't armed. There was no firearms involved. But that's why I say that the rise of right-wing populism, is within the close society as well as the wider society, and I think anybody with half a brain, to be honest with you, has to be mindful of the fact that this could rise up absolutely anywhere. It's not, it's not a polar issue. On one country.
We've seen people like Steve Bannon, especially touring Europe, having been obviously involved at the highest levels with the Trump election, and we've heard this idea of what they call stochastic terrorism. This is a really interesting theory that the goal of some of these right-wing populist demagogues, if you like, is not to commit violent acts themselves, and not even to direct violent acts, but to just feed the rhetoric and the kind of dog whistle ideas of violence, and then rely on individuals making the decision themselves to take up arms.
Unfortunately, I see it, and other people have seen it as well, with the language that Michael Gove has been using in recent days, where he refers to the SNP as sectarian nationalists. I think that is very, very dangerous language, and he is using sectarian in a certain way, which is obviously for my mind, he knows exactly what sectarian means in the west of Scotland, and he is appealing to the unionist population that in no such way are they sectarian. We are the sectarian sect in this. There was one suggestion that we were pro-Catholic, to the favour of, and I just don't get it, because it is very, very, as I say, it's very dangerous, very highly emotive language, and again, it's pandering to this English nationalism that we're seeing the rise of.
We have seen some of this in the UK, of course, with Joe Cox's murder. I mean, that was not, it wasn't like Nigel Farage ordered a hit on her, but a lot of people would argue that the kind of language, the kind of message that the Brexit campaign was putting out was exactly the right message to trigger somebody who maybe was in that state of mind.
We have to watch the language that we're using at this moment in time, because you don't want to denigrate anyone that has got mental health issues. But there are people in society that are slightly unbalanced in their own person and in their own persona. And
waiting for a
there
trigger.
there are certain trigger words, there are certain buzzwords that would, like just, let's set someone off. I mean, I was driving in here tonight and I had, pretty much like 2 near misses in my car on the M8. And one of them, the window got rolled down and a couple of verbals get exchanged. And I thought, what are you doing? Stop it. There's no point engaging with these people. You're just getting yourself angry and upset. Now, I mean, if that happened to someone, some might say I'm slightly unbalanced, but I mean, if that happened to someone who is really severely unbalanced, it could lead on to bigger things.
Sure.
So I think there was a wide call within the House of Commons last week when they were discussing language and rhetoric, and when they were labelling the Benn Act as the Surrender Act and the Capitulation Act and all the rest of it. And the wider consensus was that everybody needs to, tone it down a bit. But I mean, to my mind, there are some more than others that need to wind their neck in here. It's been played out through this frustration of Brexit. And to go back to Germany as well, these right-wing demigods, as you quite rightly describe them as, they are frustrated figures as well. Do you know what I mean? There are people within Germany who don't have the compassion in their heart. When they see countless refugees being housed and being humanely treated and stuff like that. So that's their frustrations overboil and unfortunately starts a chain of events which results in what we can see. Going back to the school child, you really have to question as to why a school child would take that kind of action and do those things. In other scenarios, you can explain it away with Farage and the big poster with the queue of migrants and refugees and stuff like that, and that gets people up. It gets their hackles up, and you hear it in the train, you hear it in buses, and you hear about people's derogatory way that they talk about people, how they describe them. And it's just, again, it's just feeding into this right-wing populist narrative that, is just a nasty element about, within society.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of right-wing populists, we do now, I'm afraid, have to move on to Brexit news. And today we had another hearing in the Court of Session. And anti-Brexit campaigners actually claimed victory after the Court of Session decided today to wait before ruling whether or not to force Boris Johnson to seek a delay to the divorce date if he hasn't struck a deal within the next 10 days. As we said, the Benn Act was passed last month, requiring to ask for a Brexit delay if there isn't a deal in place by October 19th. The chances of an agreement at the moment still look slim after Leo Varadkar said that there were still big gaps between the two sides. Boris Johnson, of course, has said that Britain will leave on October the 31st as scheduled and that he'd rather be dead in a ditch than ask for any further delay. But he has also said he would not break the law and has not yet been able to explain the contradiction. So this week, of course, anti-Brexit campaigners asked the Court of Session to issue an order stating that Johnson must abide by the Act and to send a letter on his behalf if he refused to do so. This is a power that's open to the Scottish courts called nobile officium, which means that the court can specify a remedy for a legal problem if there isn't something specified in law. So this can be used for things like family law cases to create kind of bespoke solutions. But in this case, it would enable the court to actually do what Boris Johnson is legally required to do if he refuses to do it. So the court said it would normally have rejected the challenge because, again, it's all politics, and indicated that it didn't want to see judges brought into the debate. It said the court may only interfere in that debate if there is demonstrable unlawfulness which it requires to address and to correct. And at present, there has been no such unlawfulness. They said they've decided to delay the consideration of the case until October 21st, which would be after the date when Johnson is required to actually have sent the letter. One of the judges said it's clear that there will be changes in circumstances over the next 10 days. The court will, for these reasons, continue consideration of the reclaiming motion and the petition to the Nobile Officium until Monday the 21st of October, by which time the position ought to be significantly clearer. Government lawyers told the court that Johnson accepted that he would carry out the requirements of the Benn Act, even though he says he will not be asking for any more delays. Meanwhile, Joe Mom, who was one of the lawyers behind the case, said, "We have extracted from him a promise that he will comply with the law. If he breaks that promise, he will face the music, including possible contempt proceedings, and the courts are likely to make good any failure on his part, including signing the Benn Act letter." Johnson's office had no comment to make. So what do we make of this? Is this good news for anti-Brexit campaigners, Chris?
I personally think it's great news because it basically means that a ruling is yet to be made on this pending Boris's actions. Mm-hmm. So they're willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. I think Joanna Cherry would have been possibly been a bit despondent when the judgment was delivered. Maybe not a judgment, but I think she has to take heart insofar as that is not slipped off the hook yet, and this. The 21st is going to be very interesting because Parliament is actually going to be recalled on the 19th, which is a Saturday. And there's only been 3 occasions prior to this that Parliament have sat on a Saturday. One was in World War II. The other one was the Suez Crisis, and the other one was the Falklands Crisis. So this puts Brexit right up there with crisis.
Yeah. We've
all known that we're living in a crisis at this moment in time. And, we have to give praise and thanks to Joanna. Without Joanna being there, being the eminent QC that she is, I think that the Tory government would have got away with a lot more had it not been for Joanna's involvement. And
she really has played an extensive role in these legal challenges, along with Joe Mom and in fairness, several other MPs, but those two have certainly been the leaders. Meanwhile, in Brussels, we're hearing that talks over Brexit have come to an abrupt halt. Just days after the British government demanded that negotiations should become more intensive. Sources on both sides confirmed that no meetings were scheduled, with just 22 days remaining before the UK is due to leave. Until today, discussions had been almost daily ever since Boris Johnson and Jean-Claude Juncker met for lunch in Luxembourg in mid-September. Stephen Barclay, as I said, called for the talks to intensify to try and secure a deal earlier in the week. But after the events of yesterday, when an unnamed Downing Street source accused Angela Merkel of wielding a veto on the UK leaving the customs union, things appear to have hit a wall. Michel Barnier told reporters the EU will remain calm, vigilant, respectful and constructive. I think a deal is possible and very difficult, but possible. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson is expected to meet Leo Varadkar tomorrow, and Barclay is expected to meet Barnier in Brussels tomorrow. Both sides are, of course, keen to avoid blame. That's one of the key issues at the moment, I think, is trying to sort out that issue. Although yesterday Varadkar told RTE that he believed it would be very difficult to secure an agreement by next week. He said, essentially what the United Kingdom has done is repudiate the deal that we negotiated in good faith with Prime Minister May's government over 2 years, and have sort of put half of that now back on the table and are saying that's a concession. And of course, it isn't really. So it does seem that patience is wearing thin in the EU. Another French representative in a meeting of the European Commission yesterday said there can be no assumptions about a free trade deal with the UK after Brexit, given British demands to remove all level playing field conditions such as non-regression on environmental standards. France made the point that free trade agreements were always decided on a case-by-case basis, with the final result not automatically certain. So, in a report to member states, a Commission official said that the UK wanted a basic free trade deal. So it does seem again that tempers in the EU are getting very, very worn in dealing with Boris Johnson and his government. What do you make of this latest?
Well, are we surprised? you know, it's that the whole issue of a Brexit deal is always going to be a rehash of whatever Theresa May has tried to do within the last 3 years. And any deal that she brought back was voted down 3 times. If Johnson comes back with any kind of a deal in any such way, shape or form, it's not going to be good enough for us. I can tell you that right now. And we're going to oppose it. I would say Plaid would oppose it. Obviously, the Greens as well. So that doesn't, that doesn't surprise you. Where the surprises come in is how much support will they have for any support from the Lib Dems or from Labour. Now, in the past week, the chat has all been about the opposition trying to sort of like coalesce around an opposition to any kind of deal, so that we can put in a vote of no confidence. The overriding factors in that is how many rebels are you going to get on the Tory side who are not willing to accept anything that Boris Johnson brings back. Again, that's where we come into Joanna's action, and it is then up to the opposition to either say that they want to pursue their own Brexit agenda, deferred of course, or whether they would actually go and revoke Article 50, which Joanna a year and a half ago suggested that this would be the best way to go. Do you know what I mean? And the more that this runs on, Boris will favour a general election less. The Labour Party, and the Lib Dems would favour an election even more. So, that it's classic running down the clock, which the Tories seem to love to be able to do. May done it to great effect for the last 3 years. Boris is doing the exact same thing, and he's trying to back everybody into a corner and basically say, I know it's a crap deal, but this is the only deal I've got. It's either this deal or no deal whatsoever, which is his preferred option. And when we get into that area, that's when the real court involvement will start to kick in.
Yeah, well, as we move towards that EU summit next week, Emmanuel Macron of France and Angela Merkel of Germany are due to meet just before that. Macron will meet Merkel at the Elysee Palace on Sunday to discuss European affairs ahead of that EU summit, which will be on the 17th and 18th. And there is actually a Franco-German summit on October the 16th as well. But this story again, this one from Reuters, saying EU diplomats are sceptical about the chances of a deal. Most expect Johnson to be forced to accept a delay. One EU official told Reuters, there will be no rabbit out of the hat solutions. There will be more talks and more political contacts, but for the time being, there is no breakthrough to be reported. Johnson, of course, has said that the summit next week is the last chance to secure any kind of deal. He did propose a possible solution to ensure the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland does not become a backdoor into the single market and the customs union. But the EU's reaction kind of suggests that unless there is some unexpected last-minute breakthrough, Johnson will have to decide whether to accept another delay or to go for a no-deal Brexit and get around a law demanding that he look for an extension. An official, Günther Oettinger, one of the financial officers of the EU, said, unfortunately, no bold new offer is coming from the EU side at this stage, but adding that the bloc was not closing the door to more talks. So Michel Barnier said he was meeting Steve Barclay tomorrow to check if there is any more flexibility on the UK side to head for a deal. For now, there seems to be none. And again, it just highlights again that it does seem that the British government is no longer trying really to find a deal.
No, they
it's
really
just trying to run the clock down.
They are, and what is more shocking for me is that we're not hearing an awful lot from the SNP as to what possible scenarios are going to come out of the 31st. And I don't think that we will hear anything on the main stage of the conference, which is coming up. Mm-hmm. So it will all be conjecture and private conversations that you're going to be able to possibly glean anything as to what course of action that the Scottish Government might make. Now, in saying that, I don't want to come across as sounding insular. Scotland has always been concerned about what happens to the UK as a whole. But as this gets closer and closer and it starts to running in to nearer the 31st of October, we have to see exactly where we're going to be left with. If the contradiction of Boris Johnson saying that he's going to sign the letter, he's going to abide by the law, but then, actually he didn't say that he would sign the letter, he said he would abide by the law. What is it now down to? Does the Scottish judicial system send a letter on Boris Johnson's behalf? Is it sent on the behalf of the citizens of Scotland? Is it do they compel somebody like Dominic Raab to send the letter on Johnson's behalf because he won't sign it? He would rather die in a ditch. We would all love that, I suppose. But yes, it is. You and I must be looking forward to discussing other pressing matters, and Brexit is just another thing that we seem to be discussing every time that we're in the studio. And just on that very quickly before we move on, we also saw news today that a number of Conservative MPs are furious at the suggestion that, according to a memo that a Number 10 source wrote, to marginalise the Brexit Party, we will have to fight the election on the basis of no more delays, get Brexit done immediately. This is thought to have come from Dominic Cummings, unsurprisingly. They believe that this is the only way that the Tories can outflank the Brexit Party. Up to 50 Tory MPs have apparently suggested that they wouldn't stand as Tories if this happened. Although my assumption is that those seats would just get filled by more hard Brexiteers. So what do you think the likelihood, just very quickly, what do you think the likelihood is of that being in the manifesto? Well, it's it's very possible that it is going to be in the manifesto, and it is actually playing into the opposition hands. As Angus Brendan McNeill pointed out a couple of weeks ago, it's very difficult for the Tories to run an election when there's empty shelves in the supermarkets. Cummings knows this, and that's why they've been pressing for an election now. And we've been holding off. Now, I said a couple of years ago that Nicola was going to hold off and calling an independence referendum until she wants the middle classes of Scottish society to see exactly what a bourich that Brexit is and what it will mean to them. Because up until now, Brexit hasn't really had an impact on the middle classes and the higher classes of Scottish society. Once that hits, and they can see exactly what Brexit is actually manifested into, then I think that'll be the ultimate best time to call for a referendum.
Well, on that note, Tony Blair, one of our favourite people, was in Scotland yesterday. Speaking to the Scottish Parliamentary Journalists Association on Tuesday, he warned Jeremy Corbyn against horse trading about the union, saying it would be a big mistake to consider granting a Section 30 order to the Scottish Government just in order to secure the support of the SNP at Westminster. He said it would be a major category error, both in principle and politically. I don't think that Labour should give any indication at all that it's prepared to put the union on the table as some form of bargaining chip. And I think this is really interesting phrasing. He says, is Boris Johnson putting the union at risk because of Brexit? Yes, of course it does put the union at risk. It puts Northern Ireland at risk. It puts Scotland at risk. And I think that was, as I said, I think that was really interesting phrasing. It puts the union at risk. It puts Northern Ireland at risk. It puts Scotland at risk. Doesn't threaten the union then. What it threatens is territory that you think belongs to you. That is the way that comes across to me. Yeah. It threatens our control on Northern Ireland and our control on Scotland.
Yeah, I think if there was any way that Blair could get back into the Labour Party and garner round support of his Blairites and stuff like that are still there within the Labour Party and in the PLP as well, I think that he could quite actually topple Corbyn, and actually see a resurgence of, dare I say it, New Labour. They are staunch unionists, core unionists. Everybody knows that Corbyn is a Republican, and the one enigma about Corbyn being a Republican is the fact that he's been very, very wishy-washy when the discussion of the Constitution has been brought up. Again, I demonstrated as Trump to be a bit of a weather thing. Corbyn's a bit like that as well. He's all for a free Palestine and a unified Ireland, but not an independent Scotland. Up until now, he's been kind of, this, that, and the way with it. But it's interesting that everybody thought that it would be Gordon Brown that would be coming out before an election. Now, they're really reaching for the big guns now with Tony Blair.
Yeah, well, he did say something else which I think shows just how clear his grasp on Scottish politics is. He said, "My belief is that it will be clear over these next months that there is potential for renewal of the centre ground of politics." He said, "I think that's true in the UK as a whole. I think it's true in Scotland as well. With the departure from the scene of Ruth Davidson from politics in Scotland, there is a very open space for the competition for that centre ground vote." So Tony Blair thinks Ruth Davidson is the centre ground. God help us all.
Indeed.
We move on now to Donald Trump. More Trump news because, again, like Brexit, Donald Trump just never stops giving us bizarre and just unpredictable things to talk about. So this is a story from The Guardian. Donald Trump pushed the United States towards a constitutional crisis on Tuesday when his legal counsel said the White House would refuse to cooperate with Congress's impeachment inquiry. So his counsel, Pat Cipollone, said in a letter to Democratic leaders in the House of Representatives, given that your inquiry lacks any legitimate constitutional foundation, any pretense of fairness, or even the most elementary due process protections, the executive branch cannot be expected to participate in it. The letter appears to put the emphasis on political rebuttal rather than a structured legal argument, perhaps marking a new strategy to counter the impeachment threat with stalling and counterattacking. In particular, the White House objects that the House did not formally vote to begin the impeachment inquiry, breaking with precedent set in the inquiries into Richard Nixon and Bill Clinton. Pelosi has insisted that the House is well within its rules to conduct oversight of the executive branch under the Constitution, regardless of a vote. But in this letter, Cipollone wrote, "Your unprecedented actions have left the president with no choice. In order to fulfill his duties to the American people, the Constitution, the executive branch, and all future occupants of the office of the presidency, President Trump and his administration cannot participate in your partisan and unconstitutional inquiry under these circumstances." It's a fairly extraordinary move, but it does seem that Trump has been wildly emboldened by the fact that he knows with virtual certainty that no matter what happens in the House of Representatives, he is never going to be removed from office by the Senate at this stage.
Yeah. Basically, what he's saying there actually it's actually quite Scottish, to be honest with you, because what he's saying there is, right, well, it's my ball and I'm taking it away and I'm not playing anymore. Do you know what I mean? He's come to the point where, it's strange because I don't think we've actually seen this in American history, American political history, of a president basically taking non-compliance and ultimately pleading the fifth.
Well, I think it goes even. I think it's actually even worse than that. It's not like he's just refusing to cooperate. He's also been saying quite openly to China, "Go and investigate Joe Biden. Go and find some dirt on him." And again, he knows that is unlawful. He knows that he's not supposed to do it. He knows that it's a potentially impeachable offence, but he knows that he won't get done for it, and so he feels and that's quite a dangerous situation to be in, where the president feels there's no check on his power.
Yeah, because he has always portrayed himself as someone who really doesn't give two shinies, and he is over and above not just the law but anything else. Everything else is completely beneath him. And that's the way that I perceive Boris Johnson to be acting on as well. And I alluded to that fact a couple of weeks ago in this show, when that Johnson is basically taking schooling lessons from Trump. And you can see this
or they've both taken lessons from Steve Bannon,
or maybe even Dominic Cummings as well. Maybe he's taken the registration class and Steve Bannon's taking the remedial class. And, as again, you look at any right wing. I'm not saying that Trump is a dictator, but if you look at any right wing dictators throughout history, they have always ruled with an iron fist, and they have always said that their will be done, and to hell with the consequences. One person's own conviction of that he is doing it ultimately for the betterment of the country, that gives him the brazen order to charge on and carry on regardless, and say, well, look, I don't care what you're planning in the background. I'm single-mindedly attacking this situation, and I'm carrying on, and you know, and you do what you want to do.
I'm sure the story will just keep running and running. It's the impeachment process is expected to take at least a few months, so I'm sure we are going to be talking about this for some time yet.
I mean, honestly, how he actually sleeps at night between this impeachment thing that is running at home, and what he's doing. In other places of the world, it honestly defies logic. It really, really, honestly defies logic. You look into the mindset of these people, and you think, "What is your train of thought?"
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. We will, as I say, we will keep watching that. But back in Scotland, we have some good news, which is always nice. A £3 million action plan to tackle discrimination and challenges faced by the Gypsy Traveller community has been launched. The plan, which has been co-produced with the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities, will support improvements to accommodation, education, healthcare and access to benefits. Local authorities will use £2 million of the funding to improve Gypsy Traveller accommodation and sites, with the remaining funding going towards third sector children's education projects and health and social care initiatives. So what do you make of this news, Chris?
Well, I think it's great, actually, because the Gypsy community has been very much maligned in not just recent years, but in past years as well. And I think it's a choice of lifestyle. If they wish to roam around the countryside and stuff like that, and if that suits them, who are we to deny, their way of life and their heritage as well? Mm-hmm. So, again, it just shows that the Scottish Government to be, working for everyone, that they are willing to be inclusive of all society, and if it helps the Gypsy community access, services, schooling, benefits as well, which have been severely lacking in previous years, then it's definitely the way to go. If you show a bit of respect, to them, then and I'm not saying that they don't, but they would hopefully reciprocate that by showing a wee bit of respect to our beautiful countryside which they live in. Mm-hmm. And it's a polar opposite from the rhetoric that was coming out of people like Douglas Ross and the Tory MPs up in the Highlands and Islands, who were saying that they were a blight on the landscape and they were damaging tourism, and they just weren't wanted in community and society as a whole, which is it's it's a dangerous right wing attitude to have. So I personally welcome it.
Absolutely. So in other Scottish news, this is quite interesting. Research has been done on juries in Scotland. There's a major research into how juries reach decisions has found that the size of the jury, the number of verdicts available, and the type of majority required may all have an effect. So reducing the jury size from 15 to 12, which has been suggested by a number of people, would, they think, lead to more individual jurors switching their positions towards the majority view. Asking juries to reach a unanimous or near unanimous verdict might tilt more jurors towards acquittal, and removing the not proven verdict might incline more jurors towards a guilty verdict in finely balanced trials. So this was 969 individual participants in 64 mock juries. Basically watched a couple of different trials, and their considerations and their votes were then analysed. Do you have any thoughts on this? Do you think there's a good reason to reduce jury sizes or get rid of the not proven verdict? I know we could go into a long talk about this, but quick answers.
It's not, I for maybe the right and wrong reasons, I don't want to see the removal of the non-proven verdict. But with regards to jury sizes, to reduce juries, I think, is possibly a good thing. However, I would still want an odd number.
Yeah. I was just thinking that myself.
You can't have an even number, because that leads to wider ramifications of 6 and 6.
Yeah, it makes things very difficult.
So I would, if they're going to reduce it, 11 would have been a good number, and that would have been a way to go. And with regards to the not proven, I think that's again something that has to have wider debate. I think it's something quintessentially unique to Scotland. And it's something for the Scottish people to decide.
Yeah, I mean, this is just research. It's not any formal proposals, but just interesting to bring up. You can find that research online if you want to have a closer look at it. The Green Investment Programme opens as well. Projects to help Scotland transition to a net zero economy by 2045 can now apply to be included in a new Green Investment Programme. This was announced by Nicola Sturgeon today at the Ethical Finance 2019 conference in Edinburgh. The First Minister said, "Scotland is determined to lead the transition to a net zero carbon economy, and we have been clear that we must leave no one behind. With 85% of the finance for this transition coming from the private sector, we must do everything we can to help all parts of the economy contribute to net zero emissions by 2045. So this is our aim is to take to market a £3 billion portfolio of investable projects over the next 3 years. So just another part of the Scottish Government's ongoing green ambition. What do you make of that, Chris?
Yeah, well, it's again, it shows you that our government are able to get on with the day job and look, into the future. And I think it's, to be lauded. I would hope for more support from the Scottish Greens. I know that they would want things done a lot quicker and a lot, on a grander scale. But you would like to know that there was at least a consensus of support from the Scottish Greens to say, we appreciate what the Scottish Government are doing, in order to meet those targets.
Okay. And just finally, very quickly, the Nobel Prize for Chemistry was awarded today. The Nobel Prize for Chemistry went to John B. Goodenough, M. Stanley Whittingham and Akira Yoshino for their work on lithium-ion batteries. So John Goodenough, at 97 years old, is the oldest laureate to ever win a Nobel Prize in any discipline, and Whittingham is the second British-born researcher to win a Science Nobel Prize this year alone. We don't really have time to talk in any great depth about it, but if you use anything that has a rechargeable battery, you have these men to thank, because your phone and virtually all other rechargeable batteries that we use now, including in electric cars and everything else, are lithium-ion batteries. So 3 men who've made a tremendous contribution. And Goodenough actually said that when he invented it, he was just trying to make a better battery. He never imagined that it might get used for anything particularly useful in future. He just wanted a better battery.
I always hoped that I would maybe get a Nobel Prize for Chemistry at school, but after the eyebrows got blown off, there was no chance of that.
It's a tough one. But I think generally speaking, they expect a wee bit above O-grade level for that. So, but anyway, congratulations to those gentlemen. It is a tremendous achievement for anyone to achieve a Nobel Prize. So, congratulations. And just finally, before we go, as always, we want to tell you that making TV programmes is an expensive business. We do our best to keep things on a very tight budget here, but just keeping the lights on is difficult. So please, if you are able to, do go to the site that's on the screen right now, become a Broadcasting Scotland supporter at broadcastingscotland.scot/register. Your £5 a difference makes all the difference to the development of new media for Scotland, which is something that I think anyone who is watching this wants to see more of. So do please support us if you can. In the meantime, it just leaves for me to thank Chris for joining us again. I know you were feeling a bit under the weather today, Chris, but you've ploughed through the show admirably.
You've perked me up, actually. You've perked me up. So thank you for that, Kenneth.
And thank you to all of you for joining us as well. We will be back on Sunday with the Full Scottish, and then we'll be we're back tomorrow night. I almost forgot about that. And on Sunday we'll be at the SNP conference. Excuse me. We will be covering the SNP conference in as much detail as we possibly can. So do tune in then. I'll be there. I won't be here tomorrow night, but I will see you at the weekend. So thank you very much for joining us tonight. Good night.